Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I do hope that you're exceedingly well. Loads and loads of love to each and every one of you, and I hope you're all fighting fit and ready to listen to a lovely story. I don't know what your time zone is, but morning, noon or night, welcome to the channel, and don't forget to get that lovely cup of coffee or tea or cocoa. I personally love cocoa and tea. Those are my favourites. But whatever it is that you drink, go and get it because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Atsa, a Navajo name meaning eagle. That means strength, wisdom and courage. I'm from North Carolina, situated in the southeastern region of the United States, which lies on the Atlantic coast midway between New York and Florida, bounded by Virginia and the Atlantic Ocean to the east, and South Carolina and Georgia to the south, and Tennessee to the west. We are known for our quintessential, perfect beaches, which is a desired tourist destination for many people around the world, and the Great Smoky National Park, which is the most visited park in the entire United States. I was born and raised in North Carolina by my Navajo father and my New Yorker mother. My story that ultimately led to my Bigfoot encounter happened to me in the 80s, and for the sake of protecting the people in the story, I'd like to keep the location in my story anonymous, if you don't mind. At the time of my extraordinary encounter, I was 25 years old and was a qualified veterinary surgeon and an experienced tracker and hunter, following in my father's footsteps and his father before him, who was Navajo, and knew everything about hunting and tracking, as the culture's ancient roots are deeply connected to the land. From a very young age, my father taught me absolutely everything he knew about the natural world, and it was an awe-inspiring skill he was desirous to pass on to me as his legacy, so to speak. I have the extraordinary ability to go into a region and see things that other people will almost certainly overlook. I may notice something like a tuft of grass bent backwards in a particular way, or some peeled bark on a tree, or anything like that, which immediately gives me information about the animals that have recently frequented the area. It is a phenomenal, formidable skill that goes well beyond just tracing blood trails after a hunt to locate an injured deer, or even following animal scat or imprints in the ground. Another aspect of the job is extrasensory perception. This is an innate sense of intuition which I have developed over many years from my Navajo roots through meditation and connecting with my higher self. This is a prodigious skill we are all capable of developing and is something built within each and every one of us as a natural inbuilt protective mechanism. It is when information within our gut persuades us to leave a place or to abandon the hunt, or not to go to work on a particular day, or not to trust an individual you encounter. I gather during the 9/11 disaster, there were people who didn't go to the World Trade Center on that fateful day. They sensed something was not right. Some may have called in sick on the day in question, as on an unconscious level, they knew instinctively that something was wrong, and psychologically it manifested itself in them in the form of a physical sickness. On a subliminal level, they were actually listening to their gut, and is something we all need to learn to do, as it serves our greatest interest and our highest good. When I visit a location, sometimes I will close my eyes and feel the energy of a place, and you will be amazed what I can discern. I have even found lost children with this finely honed sensory perception. Every morning I arise early to meditate, so that whatever the day may hold or involve, it gives me a heightened, finely tuned awareness and perception of how to deal with people, animals and situations I may encounter. For me, it's as vital as grabbing that morning coffee for that quintessential caffeine boost. Even in the 80s, when I was a young man, there was no coverage about Sasquatch or Bigfoot at the time, but I had learnt about the existence of the giant hairy men that lived in the caves within the mountains from my grandfather. He told me many stories about these people who were described as reticent, shy, and in most cases benign and benevolent. There were, of course, some of these hairy men that were dangerous and aggressive, but this behaviour was more inclined to be found in the males, who were dominant and territorial. My grandfather told me of a case he remembered as a young boy. It concerned a little girl called Dolly, which in Navajo means bluebird, who went to play in the forest. He knew the girl well, for he had played with her on multiple occasions, as she was a year older than him. On this occasion, after playing hide-and-seek in the woods with her friends, none of the children could locate her hiding place, and she failed to return back to the village. The villagers were fearful that she had been attacked and devoured by a wild animal, but she was returned safe and well, carried in the powerful arms of a hairy giant from the mountains. My grandmother said that they were about to search for the young girl when they heard this booming sound. It sounded like something heavy was bolting and thundering through the forest, and that was when they saw him. My grandfather said that they knew that the legends were true, and a race of giants did indeed live within the mountains. My grandfather described the man as being big, covered in long golden brown hair, with overlong arms and powerful legs that moved with incredible grace, and he held his torso so straight, like that of a soldier. He smelt strongly of the pine cones from the valley. The child's mother went running fearlessly towards the giant, for so grateful was she to see her daughter alive. The giant placed the girl gently on the ground and made a strange grunting sound. My grandfather said he had the kindest eyes that he has ever seen in his life, and that was the only thing he could remember about the face, were those lovely, gentle eyes, so filled with genuine warmth and compassion. It is ironic that Dolly's name meant bluebird in Navajo, which means good news, and her return to the safety of the village was good news indeed. The giant turned away and glided gracefully back into the woods. It would seem that the little girl had stumbled and fallen, spraining her ankle, and she said the big man with the fuzzy hair had rescued her and told her in her mind that all would be well and not to be afraid. My personal story that led me to my own encounter with the hairy man happened in the summer of 1984, when I received a very alarmed phone call from a man whose family had lost their pet tiger, called Tiger Lily. They didn't want to get into trouble with the authorities and needed me to track her down, and so they called upon my ultimate discretion in regards to this matter. I arrived at the home to a family that was quite literally broken-hearted to have lost their pet tiger. I will not pass judgment on the family's choice to keep a pet tiger, but in my opinion it is not a wise decision to make, because these animals are still wild and could potentially be dangerous. Tigers are natural predators and should be regarded as such. I was to learn that the tiger was placed in its enclosure after the animal had been lying in the living room with the family, watching television. I gather this was a regular event, and the tiger was treated like a domestic cat or dog, as it possessed a docile, gentle temperament. My cat nuzzles up to her all the time, I was told. She's a gentle soul, and has never ever once even lashed out. I don't even think she would know how to kill something, she told me, as her food is always given to her in a raw state. I went to put her in her enclosure last night, said the owner, a very congenial woman called Lizzie, and I heard the phone ring and went to answer it, closing the door behind me without locking it. I was so distracted, and my naughty 8-year-old girl went and let the tiger out, and I only learnt about it this morning when I came to check on her. I think she's been gone for at least 12 hours now. We did go looking for her, but we couldn't find her anywhere. I know she must be in the Sylvan. What is your tiger's name? I asked. Her name is Tiger Lily, said Lizzie. She's a very gentle, docile cat. Please don't be intimidated by her, because she's not at all aggressive. If you call her, she does respond to her name. Look, ma'am, I said, not to put too fine a point on it, but a wild animal is wild, domesticated or not. I need to warn you that in the worst-case scenario, I might need to kill her. I do hope that does not happen, but I need to warn you about the distinct possibility that it could. I will be able to read her temperament and energy before I make any decisions in regard to this matter, and it will be my last option. What is more pressing is to retrieve this animal, dead or alive, in order to protect other people who could end up in the firing line of this predator, because at this moment she is a very present danger, not only to herself but to others, and that is my gravest concern. Please don't speak about Tiger Lily like that, said Lizzie. I know what you people think of us keeping wild animals as pets, but I absolutely promise you she's just a big pussycat with the hugest heart. If she was a danger, I would have never kept her for so long. I've got young children, you know. "As far as I'm concerned, she's a very significant part of our family," she said, handing me Tiger Lily's collar and lead. "If you put this on her, she'll follow you out of the woods. I'm convinced she's in the wood green, but the trouble is the place stretches back for many miles, so she could be absolutely anywhere in there, which is why we need you to find her." And so it was I entered the vast wooded area that stretched back for many long miles, and I began to examine the verdant environment, and sure enough I encountered my first tiger tracks. But as I proceeded forwards, I felt the vibrations and knew instinctively she was not around the immediate vicinity, as the sweep was filled with pretty chirps and warbles from the birds. I did not sense her presence. The wood green was exquisitely magnificent, a perfect umbrageous shaded oasis for many woodland animals, with statuesque trees rising up into the sky with such poise and masterful grace. The gentle alluring light of the sun bespeckled the forest floor in pretty soft ethereal light, which brought on a magical ambience to this enchanting sanctuary. It was draped in delicate gauzy ferns and pretty evergreen ground covers, and lavish moss draped the shapely branches of trees in a resplendent green velvet. I noted areas of the undergrowth that had been recently pressed down by pulls that were sizable enough to be a tiger's, and so I knew I was on the right track. I followed the faint markings in a northeasterly direction, and as I walked through this quarter, I observed a dozen looking deer who were very skittish and ill at ease, and it was completely clear to me by their tense, twitchy body and dispositions that they had recently fled from a predator. Their energy was so on edge. I knew things were looking promising, and something had really scared them. I imagined it was likely to have been the presence of Tiger Lily. I followed their trail of fresh deer scat that led forwards in a northerly direction. I closed my eyes and listened. Eventually the forest became incredibly quiet and alarmingly still. There was no sign of any bird song, and I could sense and feel a powerful presence in my midst. I knew I'd hit pay dirt, as I could feel that tiger and sense her formidable energy. I moved stealthily forwards through the brush, taking care about being as noiseless as possible, and hiding behind one tree trunk and then another and another. That was when I saw her, and my heart stopped beating for a moment. I want to assure you that despite working with wild animals regularly, there is something about a predator, even one owned as a pet, that has a remarkably disturbing effect on one's countenance. I immediately drew upon all my inner strength, closing my eyes for a moment and centering myself. The tiger was lying under a tree, submerged by some brush, and lying next to her was a little fawn that she was licking tenderly with her large pink tongue, as if it was her own youngling. I have heard of this behaviour in the wild before, where females with maternal leanings adopt animals from outside their species. I perceived that Tiger Lily was comforted by the presence of this little fawn. I closed my eyes to feel her energy, and I immediately was overwhelmed with emotions of fear and anxiety. Many believe that an animal as powerful and remarkable as a tiger would never feel fear, but this wild cat most certainly did, and I knew that she was disorientated, confused and uncertain by her environment. It was hard to fathom why she had failed to find her way back home, but a tiger's sense of smell is not as acute as their other senses. I moved slowly through the undergrowth and called out the tiger's name. "Tiger Lily," I called, "Tiger Lily." But I did this in a very gentle, non-threatening voice, which is very, very important. The tiger looked up and immediately darted over to my side in such a congenial way, and she was jubilantly happy to see me. She began to make a chuffy sound, which is the equivalent of a cat's purr, a sound I am well acquainted with, as indeed the only wild animals capable of purring is in fact the cheetah. I could feel the energy of her joy to see a human face, and the sense of reassurance and security that my presence instilled in her, and I knew she would easily follow my lead without much prodding, while the fawn followed behind her, as this little fawn had now adopted the tiger as her new mother. I even reached out and stroked Tiger Lily's striped coat, and my gentle touch offered reassurance to her. It was clear that this was a tiger oblivious of her own strength and power, who clearly believed she was a pussycat. I would say that I have never yet encountered a tiger quite as gentle and docile as Tiger Lily, and returning her to her owners was one of the easiest rescue missions I have ever undergone. It really was that easy. As you can imagine, the owners were over the moon to be reunited with Tiger Lily, and even the dogs welcomed her back with rapturous barks of delight. The family were beside themselves in tears. No one looked more relieved to be back home than Tiger Lily herself, and she was rubbing her body against everybody, like a domestic pussycat, marking her territory. My next job was to see what I could do about the little fawn. Granted, I could take it back to the local sanctuary where it would be raised by human volunteers, but that was not the best option. As a tracker, I knew that if I followed the deer scat, I might be able to reunite the mother with her fawn, and that was a preferable option for me. I was certain that the skittish deer that I had seen earlier on would still be in the vicinity where I'd last seen them, as they were taking coverage in some thick brush. I wiped the fawn down, trying to remove any scent from her, as the scent of a human can attract predators. I gently lifted her in a blanket and proceeded upon my way. If I was to find the mother, it needed to be done quickly as possible, as the fawn needed feeding. I trekked through the sylvan, retreating down the path I'd formerly ventured down in the northeasterly direction. And there they were, the deer that I'd seen earlier on. I immediately put the little fawn down and called out with the sound of a fawn in distress, as this little fawn was not making any distress calls herself. My father taught me how to make these calls when I was a young boy, and it enables a female doe to start investigating. Within seconds, the doe came ambling towards the fawn, while I kept myself well hidden in the brush. I knew at once this was the mother, and she seemed delighted to be united with her youngling. The doe bleated joyfully, a sound that they often make when they're happy, and she swished her tail from side to side, which is a sign of relaxation. My mission accomplished, I began to walk away, feeling really delighted about having righted the wrongs of the day, and it wasn't long before I began to sense that I was being watched. I immediately closed my eyes and connected with my higher self. What was I feeling? All of a sudden, I knew that I was in close proximity to a powerful beast. I could feel the auric field of the animal, and sense its powerful presence that seemed more formidable than that of Tiger Lily. How was that even possible, I wondered? I stood very still and tried to note the brush that had been recently pressed down, clearly by big feet that somehow seemed bipedal. I also detected a faint musty odour, a smell I would associate more with camels, with a slight sulphurous overtone. I closed my eyes again and knew immediately where the animal was, that the auric field was so strong that it bedazzled me and wrapped itself around a tree, and the energy was awe-consuming. The critter knew at once I had perceived his presence, and he stepped out into my field of vision and stared at me with deep-set dark eyes. I realised in absolute amazement that I was staring at the hairy giant my grandfather had always talked about, or Bigfoot in our terminology. Then suddenly I heard the words in my head, "This is my forest. What are you doing here?" I amazed the critter by answering him back, in my mind, and the first thing he said to me is, "You can hear me?" "Of course," I said. "What are you doing in my forest?" he asked. "I was returning a fawn to its mother," I told him. The Bigfoot looked surprised. "I'm not normally impressed by your kind," he said in my mind. "Your kind brings so much trouble. May the forest bless you for your kindness." The critter then walked away, and I stood there for a moment, hardly daring to believe what had just transpired. I'd not only seen a Bigfoot, but conversed with him too. I mean, how did that happen? It had happened so briefly, and only a moment in time, but meeting the mythical, legendary Bigfoot my grandfather had told me all about, the hairy giant that lives in the mountains, was a monumental event in my life that left a lasting, impressionable memory on me. The creature that I discerned was 7 foot tall, 500 pounds and 3 foot across the chest. I noted was covered with silver-grey hair and had greenish golden eyes and a dome-shaped head. I thought his body was lean but powerful. He walked away, moving his legs in a fluid motion, and his arms swayed backwards and forwards, rather like a marching soldier. When I first saw his expression, he looked disenchanted, like a grumpy father whom had become tired about his kid's bad behaviour.
I could sense he wasn't impressed with our kind, but his attitude changed when I talked to him telepathically.
In the past few years, I've heard so many terrifying Bigfoot accounts, one after another, and it leads me to examine our species and wonder what it is that we've done to cause such discord among the hairy men of the mountains. Does an angry father strike his son for no reason at all? It is likely that the boy provoked him to anger. Could we have provoked Bigfoot in the ways we behave in the wood, with all our ransacking of the forests, our overhunting, and sometimes belligerent behaviour of our species? Before we judge the hairy critters of the woods, should we not examine ourselves first? For my Navajo roots have shown me, for the most part, that the hairy men were benign and benevolent. What have we done to aggrieve them? So there you are. That's my story.
Thank you so much for that incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.